Well, today I'd like to talk about cooking with chestnuts. To me, chestnuts are a staple food, and they come in a prickly husk, and then once they're extracted from the husk, we have a very thin shell. So you don't use a nut cracker to crack chestnuts, like with most nuts. You actually use a knife, and the reason why you use a knife is you need to make an incision through the shell. Otherwise, the chestnuts can explode when they're heated up, because the nuts are generally seamless, and so there's no place for the moisture to go when it's heated to steam except to explode the nut, and then you can have a real mess in your oven. Now these particular chestnuts are some natural splits, and so if they've split already like these have, I can just throw them right in the skillet and on a medium-high heat, and there's no oil or water in the skillet. It's just the nuts. The ones that don't have a natural split, they need to be cut. Now the traditional method is to make an X in them, kind of like this, and an X like that, and then as they are cooked, the shell will kind of peel away, and it makes them easier to peel. But personally, what I like to do with chestnuts is I like to cut them in half, or just make any kind of an incision. They don't need to be in half. If you know they're real fresh, you can just make any kind of an incision with the knife. But if you do cut them in half, you can look inside and you can see that there's nothing wrong with that chestnut. There's no sign of any mold or decay, and this way I never eat a bad nut. So we'll let those cook for a few minutes now until they get hot and start to smell a little bit, and then we'll start peeling them. So when chestnuts are fresh, they have this very thin skin that, let's see, there's one, they have a thin skin, and this brown, inside the thin leathery shell is what's called the pellicle, this brown layer here. This brown layer is kind of cardboard-like and somewhat astringent. And you can see it doesn't, on some varieties, if they're slightly dried, like this chestnut was slightly dried, so I'm able to peel it away, but for the most part. But in some instances it's sticking a little bit here. Now when the nut is cooked, this brown inner skin, which doesn't taste very good, will remove quite easily when the nut is cooked, when it's hot. So we'll just throw this partially peeled nut right into the skillet there and let it get hot for a minute or two, and then we'll find that it'll peel a whole lot easier. And see, when these start to darken, when the shell starts to darken a bit, then I'll know that they've cooked enough that they'll be ready to peel. And so let's talk a little bit about the utility of chestnuts. Chestnuts they come from a tree. We're not talking about water chestnuts here or horse chestnuts. Horse chestnuts, of course, are toxic and don't look like these. Horse chestnuts are not pointed like these are. They're more of a flattened nut, and they're from a very different kind of tree that's not related to the sweet chestnuts. And those nuts are commonly found in urban regions, but they are not for human consumption. These kinds of chestnuts are originally native to North America, and and to Europe and Asia, and they are a very important staple food in many different cultures of the world. And nutritionally, these nuts are a carbohydrate. They're not like other nuts such as walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, where they have a high oil content and a higher protein content. These are more like rice or wheat. Think of them as like a cereal, like a grain that grows on a tree, and that's how they're used in many parts of the world, is as a staple food, in fact. Incidentally, these chestnuts are not a very good example of easy peeling varieties, in the sense that I just grabbed these from some trees that I had in my pocket, these nuts, and just harvested them, and so these have not even been cured. Now, the process of curing with chestnut is a drying process. So what curing means is simply that the nuts are allowed to lose some of their moisture in the drying process, and in the process of curing, the starches are converted to sugars, and they get about twice as sweet as they are when they're raw. They also get a lot easier to peel. So this bitter inner skin would be coming off easier if I had allowed them to cure a little bit. That's something that we should discuss, how to store chestnuts, because chestnuts are quite a bit more perishable than most other nuts, in the sense that you know, most nuts, if they're properly dried in the shell, they'll keep for a year at room temperature, but not so much chestnuts. Chestnuts need to be refrigerated to maintain good quality. They can get moldy real fast at room temperature. So, so instead of keeping them at room temperature, what we do with chestnuts is we refrigerate them. And we have big walk-in coolers that are fairly humid, and they'll keep for quite a few months in those. But in modern refrigerators, the frost-free element of a modern refrigerator tends to dry things out very rapidly. So if you were to put chestnuts, say, in just a loose mesh bag, for example, in a modern refrigerator, they would get cured very rapidly because of the drying effect of the modern refrigerator. The starches would be converted to sugars, and they would get very sweet very quickly. And the problem with that is that if you then forget about them for too long, then they would get too dry. And if they get too dry, then they get hard. They get rock hard, like a dried bean or a dried pea. And if that's the case, then you need to rehydrate them in order to make them palatable. They would need to be rehydrated. And in other words, they would need to be soaked in water, put into the soup pot, or something to soften them up again, just like with a dried bean. So how do you know if a chestnut in the shell is ready or not, or cured or not? If the nut is really solid when you squeeze it, then that indicates a very fresh chestnut. If it has some give to the shell when you squeeze it, then that would indicate that it's cured, that it's shrunk a bit, and it's gotten drier and sweeter in the process. And then you'll know that it'll be easier to peel. But if you try cutting into it and you meet a whole lot of resistance, then it's probably gotten too dry. And then it might be a candidate for re-soaking in water or something to rehydrate it. Just give them another toss or two. And I like them a little crunchy, roasting them this way. I'm going to turn the heat down now. In fact, I'll shut it off. And but if you like them softer, then steaming them or boiling them would be a better way. But we find that this is a very versatile food. Like I say, to us it's become a real staple of our diet. Sometimes you'll find some pellicle in the center of the nut, and that indicates that this particular big nut had a multiple embryo. So there was two separate potential trees within that one shell, and that's why there was a pellicle in the middle there. So now they're all peeled, and using my mask, take that off the heat, and so they're ready for eating or ready for incorporating now into any kind of recipe that we choose. But they are certainly best eaten warm. You'll find these in big cities. Traditionally, chestnut vendors will work out at the holiday season outdoors, roasting them over a brazier of some sort, and they're great hand warmers on a cold day as you peel the nuts.